Hello, my name is Avery Taylor, and today I'll be talking about the upcoming trade deadline and what every single team should be doing at that time. If you enjoy this sort of video, please be sure to subscribe. I don't want to waste any of your time, so let's go ahead and get into it. Starting out with a pretty easy one, we have the Colorado Rockies sitting at 37 and 64. Well out of the division and wildcard race, so they should be selling, of course. Names like Charlie Blackmon, Elias Diaz, even names like Brendan Rodgers. If you can get any sort of value back for these sort of players, they should probably be on the block. Next, you have the Atlanta Braves sitting 8.5 games out of their division race, but 3 games up on the wild card race. They are a team that is, of course, looking to buy here at the trade deadline. You look at their team, though, and you really are just filling the hole of Ronald Acuna Jr. They could use outfield help in that regard. And also, if you find a big piece to upgrade over Orlando Arcia, you could do it, but probably won't be a lot of those available at this trade deadline. Next, you have the Los Angeles Angels, who are, of course, looking to sell. They're well out of their wild card and division races. So you have to be looking at guys like Matt Moore, Kevin Pillar, who's had a great year very randomly, Tyler Anderson, who's also had a fantastic season. Those sort of guys should definitely be on the move at the trade deadline, and really just anybody you can get value for. Next is the Minnesota Twins, currently sat second in their division and in the playoffs in a wild card slot. This team has a few additions that could improve their teams quite significantly, starting with the starting pitching. Their starting pitching has not lived up to the expectations so far this year. Currently sat 23rd in starter ERA. So I would love to see them go out and get a big name starter. Along with that, they need to probably go get a left fielder at some point. Their left fielder WAR up to this point has not been great. They currently sit 25th in left fielder WAR up to this point, and really just had a cast of guys in the position throughout the year. Another team desperately needed some pitching is the Arizona Diamondbacks, who have not lived up to the World Series expectations that they set last season. Their starting pitching is last in terms of WAR in all of Major League Baseball, and their relievers aren't much ahead at 24th in terms of WAR this season. This team does have a pretty good list of regular starters in the field, so there isn't much to add there. You might want to look at maybe a center fielder over Alec Thomas, but he was once a top prospect. You're probably going to hold on to him for some time and give him his chances. So it's pitching or bust for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Next is the Oakland Athletics, who are once again sitting well outside of their respective divisional race. So I have them selling, of course. You should see names like Rooker. Andujar is another excellent name to throw in there, who's had a great year this year in limited time. Just anybody you can really sort of get value at that's at an expiring deal should probably be on the move for the Oakland Athletics. Next is the Miami Marlins, who currently sit with the second worst record in all of baseball. You should see big names like Tanner Scott, Josh Bell on the move, as well as Trevor Rogers. Even Jazz Chisholm has found his way into some trade rumors. Just pretty much anybody you can get value from, because this team, it's not close to competing, and it's going to be a while before we see this team really revitalize itself, so anything to get the rebuild started. And while the Chicago White Sox might be in a worse spot record-wise, I think they have more tools to pull off a quicker rebuild, just because they have players on this team that actually will go for some value. You have Michael Kopech, Eloy Jimenez, you have Luis Robert, you have Garrett Crochet. You have an excellent list of guys. They seem like they will get a good bit of value back, so hopefully they make the most of that during this trade deadline and get a good haul back and start that rebuild up very quickly. Then we have a team that very recently switched from buyers to sellers in my mind, and that's the Cincinnati Reds. I think coming out of the All-Star break, getting swept by the Nationals is just kind of unacceptable, especially in the spot that they are, and it's going to lead to them being sellers at the deadline. I have people like Frankie Montas, Buck Farmer, Nick Martinez, all could be on the move at this sort of time. Just any of those guys that are kind of close to expiring deals that you think you can improve upon, especially next season. I don't want them to do a full teardown, obviously, because this is a very young team, and they should be looking to continue to build forward after this season. Next is the Tampa Bay Rays, who currently sit 5.5 games out of a wild card spot. I have them selling, of course. This is a team that's kind of in that limbo spot, but we know they love to save money. You have people like Isaac Paredes, Randy Arozarena. You had Yandy Diaz, who just got put on their restricted list, so who knows if he'll be available or not. So it's really just a matter of who do you want to get rid of, who do you want to pay. Realistically, none of their deals are expiring for another couple of years, but at the same time, they are arbitration available, and they will probably start to dig into that raised money that they don't like to spend. So I wouldn't be surprised to see all of them on the move at some point, and another rebuild starting in Tampa Bay. Next to the Milwaukee Brewers, who come into the trade deadline up 5 games on their division. This is a team that really could use another first baseman. They have some of the worst performances up to this point in the year from that first base spot, as well as the starting pitching. It's really seemed to be lacking, especially once Corbin Burns is out. Plus some injuries, it's really kind of left them hampered this season, so hopefully they can add on to that starting pitching at the deadline. Next is the Philadelphia Phillies. They're kind of in a weird spot because they're so good that it's hard to really find somebody that really stands out for them. I think they'd have to go and add one of these premier players of this deadline to really make it worth their while, but I would like to see them add an outfielder, whether that be in center field or right field. I know that kicks Nick Castellanos to the bench, but he hasn't been overwhelmingly good to justify his poor defense. And then Johan Rojas, we know he's a great defender, but provides little to nothing on the offensive side. So again, if they can go get a premier guy, a Luis Robert, that sort of player in that spot, that would be fantastic. And then they could also use a big name closer, in my opinion. I don't love Jose Alvarado going out there and closing for them. I know they have some dogs in that bullpen, but I'd like to see them get a big name closer for the postseason. But aside from that, this team is really good. So unless they go out and get big pieces, I don't know that the little guys are really going to fulfill the needs of this team. Next, we have the San Francisco Giants, who I think are closing in on the end of this run with these sort of players. You know, the Mike Yastrzemskis, the Wilmer Flores, Lamonte Wade Jr. I think this era is just kind of running to its end. I think a lot of them are coming up on expiring contracts, getting older in age, and this team still is not getting the results. And I would expect them to have a pretty big teardown at the deadline. They can always trade off a few guys and run it back next year, but after next season, a lot of these contracts are going to come off the books, and I expect them to try to get value back for them at some point. And it's a very similar story for the Toronto Blue Jays, who just kind of feel like they're getting to the end of an era with this set of players. They have a lot of expiring contracts coming up, the most notable being Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who ends his contract in 2026. So his time is coming to an end, but there's a long list of key role players that they will be losing within the next year or two. And I expect them to try to get value back, especially seeing that they are not really in a position to rationally make the playoffs. They could, make some drastic improvements, try to go for it again next season, but this season's pretty much a wash at this point. Next is the New York Yankees, who started the year on fire, but as of late have been cooling down quite a bit. This is a team that has very few true holes. Whenever you look at a lot of players that are struggling, it's guys that they won't move on from or they just acquired. And then you look at first base, which has been a problem all year. They replaced that with Ben Rice, who has been great ever since his call-up. So it leaves you really with third base, which has DJ LeMahieu and Cabrera, but they have been really underperforming up to this point in the year. So I would expect them to get a more everyday option there at third base. And then the bullpen hasn't quite been up to their bullpen standards, so I would expect them to go get some more bullpen arms at the deadline. Next is the Kansas City Royals, who have been kind of falling from grace ever since their really hot start to the year, but this team could use some improvements to help further aid this rebuild and fully get them into the playoffs. The first bit of piece I would expect them to get is a bullpen piece or two. This bullpen has not been too great up to this point in the year. They're 25th in terms of bullpen WAR up to this point in the year. And then really, I just think they need like a corner outfield DH type player, not necessarily, all of them. I think they just need one piece, because I don't think you're ready to move on from MJ Melendez quite yet. And I think that they could probably make do with the players they have there. I think they just need one, either a right fielder or a DH, something along those lines to help get this team really keep going, especially this offense as it moves forward. Next is the San Diego Padres, who I think have been outperforming a lot of people's expectations at this point in the year, but it is a team that could use some additions at the deadline. This is a team that has Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove down for the count, so they could use another starting pitching and bullpen option to go forward and continue their race for the wild card spot. And then I also think they could use another DH. Their DH spot has been one of the worst in baseball. They currently have Graham Pauley filling out that spot every day. No offense to him, but he's just not getting the job done, especially for a team that's looking to make that postseason push once again. Next is the Baltimore Orioles, who currently sit atop the AL East with a 1.5 game lead over the New York Yankees. This is a team that doesn't have many holes, but I think they could look to add, especially at the center field spot. Cedric Mullins is more name than production at this point. He hasn't really been getting it done since his All-Star season a few years back now, and this is a player that I think could get replaced, especially if you get a star player like a Luis Robert, something like that. But they could also use some starting pitching in my eyes and some bullpen pieces. The starting pitching is good. but they have a few injuries, and we saw last year that they could use some more star power at the spot. And bullpen can always be improved for pretty much any team. You can never have too good of a bullpen. Next up is the Texas Rangers. This is a team that I really wanted to force being a buyer at the deadline, but at some point you just can't rationalize it. Up to this point in the year, they are currently 4 games out of their division lead, which actually doesn't sound that ridiculous. But whenever you go to the wild card, they currently sit 7.5 games out of a wild card spot. And that really makes it tough because the division is going to be tough to get down the stretch. You had the Astros have been playing a lot better. The Mariners are always a tough team. And then you have a lot of aging contracts on this team, a team that's going to lose a lot of players this offseason. So I would like to see them try to get some value back from that and then try to rebuild for next year. This is a team that has Kirby Yates coming off the book, Michael Lorenzen, Andrew Heaney, Max Scherzer. These are a bunch of guys I think they could get some value back at the very least and maybe look to rebuild towards next year because a lot of these guys you probably aren't working with next year anyway. Next on the docket is the Boston Red Sox, who have been performing pretty well up to this point in the year. They currently sit 2 games out of a wild card spot, so very doable for this team. I think a lot of their needs lie on the offensive side. I think first base and second base are big needs for this team. And then they could always use some bullpen help, especially with the amount of injuries that unit has been facing. Next up is the Washington Nationals, who are in a weird spot. They're kind of like the Cincinnati Reds, where I don't want them to do a full teardown, but they are really close to competing. So I think they could lose a couple pieces, get value back, and try to move on to next year. You look at guys like Jesse Winker, who's had a great year for some reason this year with the Washington Nationals, as well as Dylan Floro, who's been pretty good as well. So you have 2 pieces right there that you can really work with, and any other guy that you don't necessarily feel like is a part of your team next year or is at the maximum of their value, like a Kyle Finnegan, maybe if you're wanting to move on for him. His contract expires in 2026. So it's really kind of up to the Nationals, but I definitely think they should do a light sell. Next is the Detroit Tigers, who are in a position to sell, unfortunately. They have some interesting names, but I don't know how many of them they're really going to be able to move on from. I think Jack Flaherty is absolutely going to be moved at the deadline, especially whenever you look at the production he's gotten up to this point in the year. But names like Mark Canha, Carson Kelly, Giovanni Urshela, those are names that a few years ago probably would have had some weight to them, but up to this point in the year, just haven't really been getting the job done, and it's going to be hard to move on from them. But if they can and get some value back, that would be nice. Next is the St. Louis Cardinals, who currently sit in the wild card at a half a game up on the last place spot. They are a team that could use some starting pitching pretty desperately. They haven't really gotten the value they would have liked out of these veteran pitchers that they acquired over the offseason. And then to go on top of that, they could use maybe an outfielder. There are not great options on this team, but I think starting pitching absolutely has to be the focal point for this team. Another team that is absolutely in need of some starting pitching is the Cleveland Guardians, who sit atop the AL Central. They currently are 25th in starting pitching ERA. So they really could use some help there. And then another team that just needs some outfielders, right field, center field, either of which could be very helpful to the Cleveland Guardians after the trade deadline. Next up is the Chicago Cubs. It's tough for me to say they're going to sell just because they're only 3.5 games out of the wild card spot, but it just looks like that's where we're at. I think they do have a couple interesting options to sell off in the deadline, especially from their bullpen. Hector Neris and Drew Smyly being the 2 big names out of that bullpen, I would expect them to move. But this is a team that I would expect to really kind of rebuild, do a soft rebuild, and really focus on next year. They have a lot of young talent coming up through that pipeline. So just being able to basically keep these stars on the team and then let the talent flow up through the system would make a lot of sense for this team. Next up is the Pittsburgh Pirates, my favorite team. And the Pirates are in need of some pieces to continue to be in this postseason hunt. So far this year, they have had some of the top pitching in the game, but they could use some help out of that bullpen. The bullpen has not lived up to the expectations, especially once you get up to that final 3-headed monster of Holderman, Chapman, and Bednar. Those middle inning relief guys could really use some help, especially with the injuries that have happened there. And then you have the center field and right field spot. I really think they only need like 1 outfielder just because I think you can make the other pieces work, and I don't want to make too much of a clog there, but I think they could definitely use an outfielder because they have not gotten good production there at all. Next up is the New York Mets, who are currently occupying that last wild card spot. This is a team that I absolutely could see going and getting pitching at the deadline whether it be relief or starting pitching help. Their starting pitching hasn't had the worst results so far. They are pretty middle of the pack up to this point, but their relief pitching has not been great up to this point in the year. And I would really like to see them go and get some help in that regard. Next, they need possibly a second baseman. Depends how much faith you have in Jeff McNeil. And then they could also use an outfielder, whether that be right field or center field. Both Marte and Bader, whenever healthy, have been okay, but neither of them are superstars at the position. As we hit the home stretch, next up is the Seattle Mariners, who could use a variety of options as they sit tied for the top of the American League West. I think they need to vastly improve this offense if they want to continue to keep pace in the division. I think that starts at first base. They did just release Ty France, and it really does clear what they are going to do at the deadline. They need to be buyers. They need a corner outfielder. They need a first baseman, maybe even some bullpen help. But they need to focus on this offense more than anything, and I think that starts with those main two corner outfield and first base slots. Next is the team the Mariners are fighting for that division crown with, and is the Houston Astros. I could see them absolutely attacking the first base spot with the vengeance. They've been trying to solve that spot for years. First, they tried it with Jose Abreu, didn't necessarily work. And then now they're trying to fill it internally, still not working. So we just have to cut our ties, try to go get a first baseman. And next, I could think they could use some pitching. Their starting pitching and bullpen could both use help. And I just think that they could use a piece or two at the deadline in each of those respective spots. And finally, it's the Los Angeles Dodgers. They should be a team in on the Luis Robert sweepstakes. They are a team in need of a center fielder. And then they could also use starting pitching and relief pitching, very similar to the Astros in that regard. This is a team that has very, very quality starting pitching, but a lot of them are injured. Yamano's on the 60-day IL, Glasnow on the 15, Walker Buehler on the 15. This is a team that could use just pieces to get them by. And then in the bullpen, we know some of these guys are really good, but you're never going to have too good of a bullpen. And then center field, they've been rolling with James Outman, and James Outman has been rolling the Dodgers. They currently have a 508 OPS from James Outman this season. You just can't have that up to this point. And so I think they could look to move on from him at the center field spot, especially if you get a guy like Luis Robert. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please be sure to subscribe if you did enjoy it. And as always, have a wonderful day and hope your team is doing well.